All right, good morning, everybody. We're back again. This is Ernie Ramirez on the E29 Baseball Podcast. We are coming to you from Adam Schwartz Studios. Again, we are sponsored by 100% Media and, of course, Chihuahua Cerveza. If you're ever out in the Newport area, swing through and see my friend Phil and all the fine people out at Chihuahua. Today, folks, we are lucky to have both a good friend and a quality coach that some of you may have come across, or the owner of Next Level Catching Academy, Justin Duarte. Justin, thanks for coming.
Awesome. Great to be here, Ernie.
Thanks for coming out on a Friday, and appreciate, as always, talking baseball with you. Most of the time when we first come in, we spend time talking out in the little lobby area there, and we kind of get going on different things. But what I always like to do to start is I have you tell me a little bit about your baseball background so everybody kind of gets to know where your path has taken you and what it is you're working on now.
All right. It's been a great journey. Starting off as a player at Azusa Pacific University, was fortunate to get drafted there after a pretty neat back half of my career there with baseball. Also played football there, but obviously baseball was kind of where the real talent was in terms of getting to the next level. So I was drafted with the Phillies, played 4 seasons with the Phillies. Played 4 seasons of professional baseball, 3 with the Phillies, 1 with the Padres, finished up with the Padres in 2002. Gosh, it seems like such a long time ago now, man.
It was.
So I had a great experience with those guys. Learned a ton. Learned from some good coaches. Obviously, came up with some good players. Guys that had some pretty good careers in the bigs. And then from there, got into coaching a little bit of high school baseball as an assistant, and then was again pretty fortunate to go back to Azusa Pacific and coach there for a couple years. The journey's been interesting. Ultimately, as you know, I'm a guy of faith, and I know that God's got a plan in everything that happens and everything that has come along on my path. And so, just the multiple stints that I've had in multiple years at the different places have been pretty beneficial for me as a coach, and just in terms of kind of growing my practice and who I am and why I coach and stuff like that. So. After a few years at Azusa Pacific, went over to University of Laverne to coach with Scott Winterburn, who was my position coach back when I played at Azusa Pacific. Had an awesome couple years there. Became a head coach at Ontario Christian High School, just a small private school here in Ontario. Did that for a number of years, and then moved on to coach with FCA baseball, summer collegiate baseball, kind of a faith-minded organization. Coaching Division I, Division II, mostly Division I, Division II athletes there in the California Collegiate League. That was a great experience. So they've all kind of been pretty unique in terms of kind of the mission of these coaching stints, and then obviously the level of the coaching stint, just the level of player that I got to be around and got to see. So did that for 3 years, for 3 summers, actually, and then kind of the door knocked with an opportunity to coach here at junior college at Mount Sac in 16, 17, actually 17, 18, and part of 19, which was pretty cool. I was with a teammate of mine, John Knott, who's a head coach, head coach there now. We kind of got that program going again, and that was neat to come in and just help him kind of in whatever he needed, And then in 2019, had the opportunity to be the interim head coach at Biola just a season ago. So that was, again, kind of one of those opportunities that again, God kind of ordained. It was nothing that I was necessarily looking after or being ambitious about going to get. And now I'm just kind of running my catching academy. I've been running my catching academy for about 10 years now. And, that's going strong. I'm coaching my kid. We've got a couple projects with the Catching Academy, but it's been a fulfilling journey with coaching. It's been unique. I've learned a ton. The game continues to change just in terms of the coaching side, the recruiting side. And it's been neat to just kind of evolve with it a bit. And it's interesting now that I'm kind of out of college coaching, but I'm still working with my catchers, with our catchers in the organization, and kind of helping them along some of that.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, and as I'm listening to you, I'm remembering back. Gosh, we go back maybe 15 years now, if not more, 16. And I'm remembering all of this that you're talking about, and it's kind of jogging more memories. And when some of the other guests I've had in here, I start thinking about different avenues from all of those different stories, having been kind of along on the journey with you through the baseball factory and being on the road and, traveling and working on the road with baseball. But we'll go forward in a little bit. But one of the questions I wanted to ask going back, I never heard a lot, maybe just because time-wise, about your time in the minors. And I'm always curious about that because we get a lot of baseball guys in. But even though we do the same type of things through baseball, everyone has a different experience or a different eye. So maybe something about your time with the Phillies and the Padres.
It was super enriching for me, coming out of a small school. Right. Back then AP was NAIA. I showed up and, hey, what school you play? It's the Pacific. Oh, where's that? A couple guys might have known of Christian Okoye because he was kind of the biggest thing that come out of APU. So it was interesting to come from kind of dominating NAIA for a couple years, right? Kind of being the big fish in a small pond, and then getting up to pro ball when you're playing, rubbing shoulders with teammates from Miami and Ohio State and Texas and Rice, you know, and you kind of have to grow up pretty quickly, because nobody really cares kind of who you are, where you've came from, because everyone's there to kind of compete and get to the big leagues, and so I remember right off the bat, that was kind of my first eye opener in terms of, okay, here, I'm nobody here. I gotta work, I gotta grind, I gotta perform, and you got to do it pretty quickly. I wasn't a super high draft pick; I was a 22nd rounder, so you got to earn everything you get, kind of in those rounds. Where some of the higher draft picks, they get a little bit longer leash, right? But I had a great time. I had some great teammates. Came up in a great draft class with the Phillies. My best memories, or maybe my strongest memories from my time with the Phillies, just had to do with the camaraderie, of being with guys day to day. I mean, you've probably heard some of these stories, right? Yeah. Just the long bus rides, the being broke for six months out of the year, coming home in the off season and trying to make more money so you can save up so you can get your car shipped out. And so it was all a part of the process of growing up and planning and prioritizing, and I think that's the big thing is really, each person kind of goes through this professional baseball, and each person kind of has their own story. They have their own process, whether they grow up and mature for the better, or some guys go the other direction. Right. And I've got just awesome memories of and friendships, guys that I live with, guys that I roomed with for a couple of years that were just awesome guys, and a couple guys that maybe touched the big leagues a little bit. And most everybody goes on to live a normal life. It's such a small percentage of guys that continue going. Right. What else? Gosh, what else is there about that? There's so much. There's so much depth, because every year kind of brings a different story to it, kind of like a different narrative that goes to it, whether it's injury, whether it's, for me, after my first couple of years, I was kind of a defensive backup, right? As a catcher, I was playing once a week, which is super tough to do, just in terms of not so much the defensive side, but your at-bats and the timing and your approach at the plate, your discipline, right? That was something that was kind of built a lot of perseverance, I felt in myself, in terms of really having to put in extra work to get ready for that sixth day, whenever it came. Those are some difficult things. And so those things really, really thicken your skin up a little bit, and they cause you to grow up. Obviously, there's a lot of things that can happen in minor league baseball that are probably are left best for off the air.
Right.
Right.
No, I get that. Well, and that's a question that I like to ask because, everyone looks at it different. And now from your background and faith and the journey that you've had to get to that level, everyone kind of goes through that same ringer, but they come out differently.
Yeah.
Some guys have more wrinkles, some guys are a little bit more polished. And I think that's kind of, it's turned into a theme for what we've been doing here, because I like the fact that everyone has a different story, but now we're all involved in a different part of that chain, for lack of a better word. Now the kids that you work with, your own son, the college level players that you've worked with, we have information that maybe they don't have to experience it that way, or they can experience it in a better way than we did based on what we're telling them. So now in baseball, you become a different part of that chain. You're no longer a player, but you're here to be more of a mentor, and I'm going to pass on that information to you so you can continue to go farther. And I think you'll agree too, one of the hardest parts now is that every player that you touch probably has a lot more knowledge than you do at a lot earlier age. So it pushes guys like us to constantly be learning and evolving, and like you had mentioned, the game always changes. And I always enjoy watching guys when I throw that question. I can see you going through the mental Rolodex. Wow, that was 20 years ago. I didn't realize that. And so, so fast forward.
And I would think, let me just stop right there. I would think that a part of our process, even probably you go back and think of what it was like for you as a player coming through junior college and your experience, right? You learn through the pitfalls, you learn through things you do well. And I think the one constant that maybe younger players can take away from this is, whether it's minor league baseball or college players that we've coached and deal with, is that they each have to own their own process. They've got to understand and have awareness of what their strengths are, what they need to improve on, because there's always kind of someone better.
Sure.
But too often times I come across young high school players, older high school players, even young college players, and they don't really have a process for their development. They kind of do what they're told. They do some things that they see other guys doing, but they don't really have a planned. It's gonna sound a little different here, but maybe an itinerary or their agenda for what they're gonna work on. Whether they're gonna work on their bat speed on Monday and their footwork on Tuesday, or their glove skills, and have that, set themselves up for what's going to happen 6 months from now, a year from now, because those are the things that I had to do as a minor league player. I remember I had to spend more time in the cages because I didn't have 97 mile an hour bat speed.
Sure.
And I had to spend more time on my tubing. I don't know if we had J-bands back then, but on my tubing, because my arm wasn't as strong as some of those other guys, those top 10 rounders. And so that discipline, if guys can learn to create that now, and I know that you give that to your players, it's something I want to give to my players. It's something that will help them with their development, but it's also something that will help them after baseball too, and whatever they go into. So
right, which actually that was going to be my next point, because you can attest now going through that. There was probably a time where maybe right around the time you get drafted, we all kind of look at that and go, okay, well, this is how I'm going to end my career. This is going to be my retirement. I'm going to play in the bigs 10 years, that kind of thing. And then there's that point where you realize, wow, I'm going to be out of baseball at 25 or at 30, or guys with long, great careers, even at 36. And we've talked about this in the past. Now what do I do? 36 is still a long life left, and how do I transition to that? And so now, you've gotten through that part of it, and you're out of baseball on the player's side for the most part, and you start to get to that fork. Do I want to stay in baseball as a coach? Can I put that aside? I know you're making that face, and it's almost, at some point when you think about it, it's almost like a slap in your own face. Like, do I want to be that guy that's telling this guy what to do, and I don't want to be this guy telling the stories that, hey, when I played. And so you make that transition. How was that for you when you had to make that decision?
It was not easy, right? The decision to, all right, should I give this another shot, opportunity, right? I just got released by the Padres in 2002. Again, as a backup catcher, I was older for the level. I got a little cup of coffee in Double-A, but then finished up back up in High A here in Lake Elsinore, which is an awesome place to play. And I think everyone kind of has their own process. I was married at the time. I'd played my last 3 years of minor league baseball married, right? So it's like, okay, the clock's ticking, man. The clock's ticking here. We don't have till 28 to kind of start our lives.
Right.
And so you just kind of have to factor those in. Some guys are single and they can play until they're 33 because that's kind of what they choose and what works for them. And that's great. But I think, everyone has to make those decisions just based on their own unique place that they're at, and whether it's hanging them up from playing or whether it's maybe going into coaching. Those are both kind of pretty similar situations.
Yeah, the lifestyle, the hours.
Because you're not going to make a ton of money, starting off coaching, unless you get lucky, which can happen, right? It's a grind still, right? And by grind, it's like it's a good grind. We do this because we love it. Yeah. We don't do this because it's a grind and I'm wearing a hard hat somewhere and we love it. Yeah. But just in terms of how do you navigate through the rest of life with the hours and family and making a living and stuff like that? How do you navigate through the rest of that without maybe putting yourself in a hole, whether it's financially or with kids, just kind of time with kids and kind of keeping the family together, the home together. Those are difficult questions, and there's no perfect answer because there's coaches all over the country. Yeah. Whether it's minor league baseball, whether it's JUCO baseball, whether it's high school baseball, they're making $3,000 or $4,000 a year, or whether they're making as a full-time assistant, maybe they're making $20,000 a year. It's still, there's limited jobs where you're going to make $80,000 to $90,000 a year, maybe touch six figures as an assistant coach. As a head coach, you can maybe find those jobs, but the competition to those, man, it gets narrow. Right. So it's very similar to playing. Yeah. It's very similar to, working your way through the minors to get that big opportunity, that big payday at the big leagues. Yeah.
It's a tough call because I asked again that question to mostly everyone here because we all come to that point, and I know we've joked before when we do things like the showcases or we do the on-field stuff, or we might do the little appearances here and there for the coaching, and it's hard not to want to put that polyester back on. As much as you hated the grind, one more time I want to go. Okay, I'll come out and I'll talk to your guys. But it's always interesting to hear that because everyone goes through it at a different age, and then I think when you evolve into coaching, which I'm going to ask you to elaborate on, it is a little bit more of a humbling experience because you may or may not be ready to completely turn yourself over and say, look, I want to give you all my information because I want you to take that farther than I did. And I think once you can turn that into more of a feeling of gratefulness to be able to do that for a player, I think that's when you kind of evolve into a coach.
And that part's probably been the easier part for me, honestly. And I think that comes from, again, just speaking personally, I had pretty neat coaches, kind of what I would say when I was growing up in baseball, to be specific. I had an awesome positional coach. I had some good offensive hitting coaches. Our head coach, Tony Barbone, he just did such a good job of preparing our team, and our assistant coaches did such a good job of preparing us individually. And so it was easy for me to go back into coaching and want to give my players as much as they can absorb, as much as they can handle, and hope that they can do more than I did, right? And so, like right off the bat, I was pretty fortunate, right? I came back to specific to coach. I got to coach Stephen Vogt, a guy who's just a sponge, a super high aptitude, pretty good athleticism, still kind of pretty raw, especially defensively. But he was able to just absorb so much more in such a short amount of time in 2 years, really. Not everyone can absorb that, and that's the tricky part of coaching is how much can you give. I can give him X, Y, Z, but I might only be able to give the next guy an X, and we might get stuck on X for a longer period of time. So that part's been a little bit easier. I've always wanted better for the guys that I coach than what I got. Just because I want to give them that experience. I think they deserve that experience. That's what I received from my coaches, even though I didn't necessarily deserve it. And I think now, as I stand back and I'm like, okay, I'm not coaching. A lot of people ask me, well, what's next? There are some opportunities here and there. What do you think about? I think about my son, because I want him to have those same opportunities to learn from me, from the game, that I'm giving other people.
Right.
And he's going to be 13 pretty soon, and
right.
he's kind of coming to that point where it's important to him and he loves it, and so I guess in this time period anyhow, I want to give my son Elijah the same thing that I've given hundreds of players throughout the year, just
Sure.
in terms of that, not just the baseball skill, but just the development as a person internally. And it's going to be fun here these next couple of years. We'll see kind of what happens, So for the time being, I don't know. We'll see what happens with college coaching. We'll see what happens with coaching in general. But that's a good question, because we want to give our guys, whether it's in the Catching Academy or whether it's at a junior college, we want to help them develop. We want to give them more opportunities than we had.
Yeah, and it's almost it's more of a internal feeling for you, because you look at that and go, you know what, hey, that guy took a little bit of me with him.
Right.
And now, because there's so many different coaches doing what we do, I think it's more important to not necessarily focus on the baseball part that you or I or some of these other coaches can give you, but you look at the part of experience. And I mean, I truly believe, not to be self-serving, but you might agree with me that you become a little bit better coach when you've become a parent.
Totally.
You understand different things. And, so much, and this leads into my next question, so much of coaching is learning how to mentor, because not everyone learns the same. Not everyone responds to the same type of things. So because you've coached at all three levels, what do you think the difference, or you've played at all three levels and coached, what do you see the difference in being a high school coach as opposed to a college coach, as opposed to the way your coaches were coming up through the minors? Each one has a different role, because you're dealing with different age groups and different mentalities and athleticism. So what do you see as the difference between those three levels?
From the coaching perspective?
Yeah, as a responsibility.
Well, the responsibilities change as you get up into NC2A with just all the different compliance rules, and there's bylaws that just that are huge, right?
I think more
you're talking more of the player
relationship. Yeah. So when you have a high school group, of course,
right,
their mentality and maturity, and your college level, because you're giving each of them a different thing along with baseball.
Right. So the difference is with coaching high school kids. A lot of them want it, right? A lot of them are kind of just there just to enjoy and have fun, play, but kind of at the better programs, a lot of those players want it.
Right.
They get their training, they play their club ball, but their scope and their perspective of what it takes to be a good college player is very minimal to what it actually takes to be a really good college scholarship baseball player. The level of maturity that it takes, I'll talk about Division II. That's kind of where I was at. The level of maturity and responsibility and discipline it takes, it's pretty high. Just with the demands. And I know a lot of players understand that. They know guys. There's weights in the morning, then there's a class, and there's practice, 2.5 hour practice, 3 hour practice, and then you have a time for a meal, and you got homework and stuff like that. And it's not so much the regimentation of what the day is like, but it's how well you're going to do in each of those parts of the day. Sure. It's the intention that they set and the focus that they set for each parts of the day. And that's kind of what separates even the good college players from just kind of the average guys or some of the role guys. Yeah, it might be a little bit talent, but a lot of it is makeup. A lot of it is how quickly can they absorb new information? How can they apply it? How disciplined can they be? How tough can they be? Do they have the ability to kind of recognize who they are in their own kind of like psychology of the game? Why do they clam up? Do I have white line fever? You know what I'm saying, right? Yeah. Or do I freeze? Or do I step up as a competitor, but am I a little bit out of control? And then the moment kind of becomes too big for me, right? So a lot of those intangibles, it's really hard to put your finger on one or the other. There are few high school baseball players that have that. That's why there's such few baseball players that kind of move through successfully through a college program and even into professional baseball. It becomes less about talent. You know, at the college level, you've got to be talented, right? You're going to play Division I baseball. You know, you got to have some tools,
right, to get there.
Right, you got to have some tools. But then to stay there and to really be a good baseball player at that level, there's got to be more than just your foot speed, your arm speed, and your bat speed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think the players that do it the best going through there, typically they've been taught well,
mm-hmm.
either in high school by their coaches, but generally what I've learned, even just kind of recruiting, it's through their parents,
mm-hmm.
it's through their families, and kind of how their families prioritize their values and the principles that they're going to kind of have in their homes. And you know, you can find some programs, some high school programs where you have a good cluster, a good culture, right, mm-hmm. a good work ethic. And you'll see more players come. That's why we see more players come out of certain high schools that go play college for some scholarship or different club programs. So some club programs do it well mm-hmm. in terms of their practice, in terms of what they value and what they want to instill in the players, because they understand what it takes for those guys to carry that on to the next level.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah, it's interesting you'd mention that, because I know now that I'll say we, you're younger than I am, but now that we're on the old end, I know a lot of times high school players will kind of make those faces when you try to explain to them that people by nature are creatures of habit. So if you don't follow the guidelines in your class, why would I think you're going to follow them on the field with me? If you're constantly late to class, why would I believe you're going to be on time when I ask you to do it? So you don't just change because I'm a lazy practice player, but I love playing the games. And they don't understand that coaches see that. You know, if you're a hard worker, you're a hard worker, whatever you do, because that's what's instilled in you. And so now going through the coaching part of it, as a coach at the college level, what was something that you think was the most gratifying for you, whether it be an assistant or a head coach? Because that's, again, a totally different type of player, maturity-wise. You're giving them something different. So high school, it's a little bit easier to see the ups and downs because you've got the emotions and the talent levels are so wide. But when you get to that college level, as you mentioned, there's a lot of talent there already. And it's almost more of maybe even a big brother, or in some cases more of a fatherly role for those guys, because this might be the last stop. You know, and for most of them it is. For most of them it is, yeah. And so now, how are you going to conduct yourself as an adult, mm-hmm. as a man? You know, so your role changes at the college level, I think.
Yeah, it's probably not too much different than from what you experience with players that you work with, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're trying to get them to maximize their potential within what they have, within all kind of the raw materials that are in their body, and some of that is also the makeup side of it. Mm-hmm. And so the thing that is most gratifying for me is seeing individual players kind of get to that potential, right? Not just the players, but also the team as well, because as a coach, you're really building kind of that team culture. You're molding these mm-hmm. guys to learn, you know, how to navigate through adversity and how to hold each other accountable. Like, those things are super hard. Like, those things accountability is really hard for high school players, a young teenager, because of like the security factor. I don't want to get on my teammate because he may not like me, or nowadays, who knows what's with social media. There's all kinds of different ways that can go, and then there's parents and stuff like that. Well, in a college program, you can mold some of those behaviors and some of those values a little bit easier, ultimately, to get to the goal of getting them to play to their potential or exceed their potential, you know. And the journey is always kind of up and down, and it's bumpy. And as a coach, you have to identify, you know, what's out of sync. If there is something out of sync, what you can do to maybe bring some team chemistry together. If you've had a tough stretch where, you know, you're grinding games, you're on the road, how do you lighten practice up a little bit, right? Like, you have your hand, and you kind of just try and flip these buttons as to what's going to get the guys ultimately to play to their potential or above their potential, you know. And so you could probably relate to that, because even though you're working with guys maybe more individually, and even with some of your teams, it's like you can see that in them. Yeah. And for you, you know, that's what you want, right? And sometimes it's rarer than others where you actually experience that. I've been pretty fortunate to where at most of the places where I've coached, we've been able to do that. I mean, even going back to last year, 2019 at Biola. I mean, we were starting like 7 or 8 sophomores and freshmen, day in and day out. And to watch them mature and develop, our freshman catcher, our freshman left-handed pitcher, our sophomore center fielder who only had 50 or 60 at bats his freshman year, and to really be able to coach them through the grind. A lot of it is mental, and it's kind of psychological, and it's confidence wise, and it's kind of creating that grit. It's just and that's the part that I love about coaching, is being able to see those things, being able to talk to these guys, get to understand what they're feeling and what they're going through, and the whys of, not just their performance, but of who they are at that time within kind of how they perceive themselves. It's pretty tricky, and again, I felt like we overachieved with the experience that we had, not the talent. Right. And you can see that even this year with Jeff Calhoun, who's done a pretty good job. Like they had a great start before this. Well, some of those guys have been seasoned, right? And it even goes back to Solinger, who was coaching there before I was, just in like recruiting these talented kids, right, to come in. And so the process of watching that and seeing their evolution and their development is the neatest thing. The same thing goes back to even coaching at Mount Sac a couple of years ago, where we made it to the Final Four, to the state championship, in a matter of a year. That's what's satisfying. And to watch, yes, teams, but individuals too, watching guys like Connor Shepard, who, struggled through part of his first year with us at Mount Sac, and then figured out the last month was incredible, because he was 10 times a player, right, that he had the capable of being in the first 2/3 of the season. Right. But the mindset wasn't there. Yeah. So to be able to help guys kind of figure themselves out, not so much to program them, but to get them to understand what's getting them to move forward, and to benefit. And all of that is process. And I'm sure you see that, right? You see that with the guys that you coach.
Well, one of the interesting things, like you were talking about, is that we see it, but it's getting them to understand what we see, because from their point of view, they're miles away. Right. But we look at it and think, you're that close.
Right. And I kind of compare this to, kind of goggles. We'll just call them goggles. Yeah. Right. One player has got, he sees a certain thing through his lens, through his goggles. And as a coach, or even we talked about parents, right? Parenting, like we see a different reality through our own set of goggles. Right. And so as a coach, as a mentor, you're really trying to kind of clean up those goggles for those guys that need it, and get them to kind of recalibrate how they see their own development, their progress, their weakness. Sure. And going back to the makeup side of what we just talked about, like it takes a huge amount of humility, right? Like confidence, yes, from players, but then humility from them to be able to step back and say, you know what, gosh, Ernie's right. Gosh, JD's right, or whoever these coaches are, like I'm gonna give that a shot. And I think, again, more the players that get to college have that. Than even some players that want it, but they don't understand kind of what it takes. Right. What that really means for them, you know, because there is adjustments, and some guys don't want to adjust.
Yeah. And a lot of times adjustments mean slowing down or backing off, and I feel like I'm losing ground when I'm doing that. Right. You'd mentioned something there, and I want to get an opinion from you here, kind of based on the current.
That's dangerous. My opinions are dangerous, Ernest.
Well, we've had our arguments back and forth, but I love you like a brother after all this time, because we've gone through stuff, and again, things we can't talk about. But if you were to take this current situation, we had talked about how when they get to the college level, prior to maybe 2 months ago when all of the play was suspended and the health things are going on, college baseball was doing a lot of that early recruiting. And I remember going back 4 or 5 years when they were starting to recruit these players a year or two earlier, talking to some coaches, and I won't mention names, but they had said, we're never going to do that. And then just by nature of the way things were, you had no choice. If I don't start early recruiting or early signing some of these guys, there's not going to be anybody left. So now it's kind of a reset. And I don't think there's too many people now that would say things aren't going to change. Everything, from the way we shop, schools, the way we play games, dugouts, coaching, everything. So what's something that you think you would like to see positive, change-wise, for youth baseball going forward, or even college or JC baseball going forward from all of this?
There's a lot of things I would love to see change. Probably not going to happen.
It's always good to be positive.
Just because there's different agendas out there.
Sure.
Different guys have different agendas. I think that one thing that so you can't really control necessarily what college coaches do or what different club programs or high school programs do, but I think one thing that's probably the most beneficial thing that can maybe bring more control to the individual players and families is for parents to kind of be educated and for families to be educated from appropriate behavior in the stands, coaching from the stands, how to talk to your coach when you don't think things are matching up with your agenda. When we were growing up, if our coaches went up and talked to our dad about some kind of gripe, we certainly didn't know about it, but it wasn't done after games. It wasn't done at practice. Like there was a purity for us. There was a purity in that for us,
sure,
where we weren't looking at what high school to transfer to necessarily. I know there's different situations for some of those things, but I would say that if parents and families at home can kind of take that step of humility and learn what the recruiting process is like, learn what it's like for a coach to manage a roster of 18 when you have two great catchers, one of them not super athletic, one of them pretty athletic and play third and play the outfield, and and just how to be able to kind of handle some of those tough situations instead of reacting and doing things that were going to ultimately impact the development of the player, even though sometimes families don't know how it's going to impact it. You know, I think there's maybe a little too much of that happens, and it's easy with travel ball because you can hop from one team to the other.
Right.
Coaches feel it, players feel it, teammates feel it, and then we kind of have this culture of, well, he's going here, he's going there, and even in colleges now, it's like different guys are hopping around from place to place every year. And I think for guys that want to play at the college level, like the college experience is pretty cool. Whether it's even if it's a 2-year JC and a 2-year and a 4-year, like that's still a pretty cool experience. Right. There's so many different things that help guys grow up, the things that they're going to remember, right? The things that you remember. Your experience is different than mine, but when you start hopping around from a 4-year to a 2-year to a 4-year to another, like, what do you take from it? Where's your home? Like, where are you going to go to? Where are you going to go to alumni games?
Right.
Who's the coach you're going to look to? Like I was like a father figure. He was a mentor to me for a number of years. And so we lose a little bit of that community. Right. Whereas we've got guys that we can go back to that we've talked to for 20 years or 25 years ago that coached us. They've been constant in our lives because we didn't hop around so much. And even just in the lifelong friends that we develop. I mean, I've got a group of awesome friends from my college days, and again, a group of awesome friends from pro ball. That was not just 1 year, so. And that's hard to do. It's hard to educate the families because there's a lot to it, even from the recruiting side of it. Like we could talk about early commitments, and if parents were educated a little bit more and families were educated, like they could kind of take care of that problem. Right. Maybe it's not a problem, but for some, but for many it is, just because there's certain schools that overcommit.
Right.
There's, he's 13, he's 14. Is he fully grown right now, or is he,
Well, it's interesting because now when I have gentlemen in like you, one of the things that I actually had envisioned for this show was that people could see you as a person, because you remember going back to when you're 16, 17, 18, talking to a college coach was, oh man, what do I say? How do I say? Do I got to wear a tie? I can't just say hi to him. Now with social media and things like that, you kind of feel like you know everybody. So sometimes, maybe your level of respect might have dropped down a little bit, but there's also that openness because you're a player too, and you're getting a chance to tell everybody what you've gone through, and there's a lot more relatability. And when you look at that in a coach and say, hey, you know what, he's been through a lot of the things that I want to go through, or he's been through a lot of places that I like, or, you know, he played someplace where I'm really interested in going, so he could really tell me and mentor me how to do that. And that goes back to like what you were saying before. When we grew up, it was different with sports in general. You know, there was that camaraderie. You know, the time when I grew up in Rialto, it was back in the old one high school, one town. You know, there was one high school in Rialto, one high school in Fontana, one high school in Redlands, and so there was that pride. You know, and you played with the same guys all through Little League, all through Pony League, and then you all got together in high school, and it was that common. And now, like you said, it's really tough because there isn't that accountability, because if I'm not happy with your group, I'll just go find another group, and that's tough. One of the other things that I was going to ask you about too is that now, and you've always been good at this because, you know, you have a business, which we'll get into, but as a coach, and now you're experiencing even more because of the age of your children. Do you think that now that we've gone so many weekends without that grind of travel, and we've got to be here on Saturday, I've got to take my other son here, I've got to take my daughter here, is it going to be easier for people to go back to what they had before? Or do you think a lot of people will look at it and go, you know, we were okay for 4 weekends in a row not going anywhere?
That's a great question. And I think there's a balance in it. And again, the organizations that run travel ball tournaments, even travel ball coaches and some entities that kind of make a living doing this stuff, they can't wait to get going. Like they're as soon as some of those dates come out, like they're going to line up, you know, they're going to line up 5 tournaments in a 4-week period if they can, because you know, sometimes they may feel like they've got to deliver. Hey, you know, they're paying X amount of dollars for this program. We got to make up all these at-bats from the last couple months. So there's an interesting dynamic that's going to happen there. But I think everything can be done with balance, and I think that's the way everything should be done. And think about pre-COVID, okay? What's been the progression that we've taken in terms of getting to where we were before all this shutdown happened? And we could probably easily see that in the last 7 to 8 years, like it's ramped up pretty high, even down to the youth level, to where, you know, you have a couple of youth club teams and stuff like that. They're playing, you know, 1 or 2 tournaments a month. They're training, but nowadays you've got teams that are playing 3 or 4 weekends. You know, and I'm talking for kids that are 10, 11, 12 years old, even sometimes younger than that.
Yeah, it's a tough grind.
You know, so there's a balance to it. You know, and there's. You know, yes, everybody wants to give their kids the opportunity to develop and play and get experience and stuff like that. But, like, you know, I'll tell a lot of my high school catchers, like, there's plenty of opportunities to play. They're going to still be there. You know, take advantage of the opportunities you have to train, with a good trainer, and mix those in as you need. And sometimes you may need a little bit more training, You may go through a 2 or 3 month stretch, and sometimes you may need a little bit more games for a couple month stretch, and sometimes you're prepared for certain things. And so, you know, gosh, for my family,
you're also missing soccer too.
Yeah. My daughter, she plays club soccer, and now my son's playing club baseball. And so a couple years ago, it was only my daughter playing club soccer, and my son was still kind of playing rec ball. And now they're both. And as much as it's like, okay, can we go somewhere? Can I go to Home Depot just to get out of the house for an hour? Like I think we have to sit down and have those conversations ourselves, and even with our coaches, because the coaches have to be okay with it. And again, sometimes the coaches kind of will want to drive that. No, we need you here. We want you here. We need you here. We want you here. Again, for catchers, it's like, if you're a good catcher, there ain't no club coach that's going to want you to stay home and train, or just want you to stay home and get the rest, right? Especially if they're playing. So that's a tough one, a tough one, and I think it's going to be hard for us to answer. But obviously, there has been some benefit for us kind of being at home and kind of getting in touch with who your spouse is again, and who your kids are, and their grades, and which usually is pretty easy, but just the family dynamic.
Yeah. Well, and again, that's got varying levels. I'm sure there's some people that after a week they were like, let's get back to school and different things. But now, and I can say this because I have a business that does that. Our express team hasn't played or practiced, but we've always looked at it from the other end. And again, me being a little bit older than old school, we only played 28 games a year or whatever it was, our rec season, and that was it. High school season, that was it. And I thought we were pretty good, but now looking at it, I understand that there's a lot more monetary goals behind it for other people. And so, being that our business makes money for training and, the games and things, but from the other end, as far as prepping players for college and high school, I personally am not a big fan that thinks the games have to be all the time. If you just look at the sheer numbers, which baseball is now, if I need to work on my fielding and I go play in a 5-game tournament and I'm the shortstop, even if I'm in there every game,
right?
Maybe I get 5 ground balls.
Totally.
Did I really work on it?
Mm-hmm.
I could take a third of that time, go to the field, and get 4 bags of ground balls. Yeah, and now I worked on it better. But, kids still want to put the uniform on. Parents, I think, still want to go out and cheer and watch their kids play. And, you and I from the recruiting end also know that for the older players that are talking about exposure works both ways. Sometimes it's good exposure, and sometimes I get exposed.
Right. Right.
I can't run, I can't throw, but I'm out there shortstop for my team. Why are they not calling?
Right, and that's where I think, again, if families are educated as to what the player needs, it's such a help, because if you're an infielder and you're working on your footwork,
sure,
and reading hops with your feet and applying your footwork and reading hops and stuff like that, and you get 3 ground balls in your game.
Yeah.
Right. So you got some ABs to go with that, but think of what an hour and a half of training. So, what do you need? What does a player need at this stage in his development? Is it technique? Is it mental toughness? Is it baseball IQ? Is it game reps? Is it live at bats? Is it? So I almost wish that there was more of a developmental approach along those lines, whereas, hey, listen, we've got a few guys that do need some live work. Hey, we're gonna plug him in because you're gonna stay home. We're gonna get some reps on the field. We're gonna work on our double play feeds. We're gonna work on our blocking drills. We're gonna work on reading balls in the gaps in the outfield. Because that's where the preparation for the competition is. Typically kids are competitors already. It's kind of innate. Yeah, it can be developed in some, but that's usually the part that you don't have to focus on as much. And that's the part that, like, a good college program, if a kid doesn't have that, they'll really work that into practice. They'll try and develop that. But some kids are weaker than others. And there's not really a good weight training program or a good fitness program for them for what their needs are. And so that's where, again, that education model of what does a player need, what does a family need, can help them kind of set some time aside. Again, I'm talking about my daughter who's in high school and playing soccer, and there's different needs that she has, and the needs that she had back in the fall last year are different than maybe what they are now, right? Sure. So it's like she's focusing on her speed and her strength right now, right? Going into late summer, okay, let's go. Let's play as many games as we need to, and then we'll reassess, we reevaluate. Okay, what do we need now? But so much of what we do is driven by what other programs already have in place for us. Sure. That we have to fill in the gaps somewhere else, and a lot of times you don't have time to do it,
right?
Because you're playing on the weekends. You've got 2 or 3 days of practice during the week, and it's not easy, especially if you're in season. So now, where does your high school season fit in?
Right.
If you're in season, so it's a tough place to navigate. Some coaches and some programs do it well, and I'm sure you guys monitor your guys well when it's time for them to long toss and work on their arm stroke, and and that's what kind of good program developers do, and that's where good names are reputable and credible, and they get out, and where some people have a lot of hype and they're all over social media, and some people just kind of go about their business. Sure. They have a good model, they have got a good plan for what they're doing. And those people stand out, right? Those are the successful, right? You see you see different people like the Trotskys and other organizations like that just continue to give, and where you see continue to success, not just from the players that they put out, but from their own development as a program.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know that, right now, technically, everyone's still in school. And so, that your hours.
I'm a teacher, right? You know that?
Well, you're here now on Friday morning. But, when I try to explain to the kids, when they tell me that they've, for lack of a better expression, they've already been on summer vacation. Well, in 3 weeks, when you're technically out of school, what's going to change from what you've done? Are you now going to turn it on and start practicing? Are you now going to turn it on and start running? Because you haven't had that 7-8 hour day of school or practice, or now you don't know when things are going to start back up. And so I've explained to some of my high school guys, hey, you're kind of gambling on that roulette wheel because you don't know when they're going to start school again. And with the current situation, my thought is, hey, they're not going to have a lot of money for extended sports. Or if we have to get started, we already lost a season, so we're not going to spend a lot of time practicing and getting you ready. You've had 3 months of doing nothing, so you should have been doing something to get ready. Or, when we go back, who's to even know that there's going to be money for JV and freshman teams? It might just be the best 20 kids at the high school, and that's what we're going to go with. So there's so much uncertainty, and I think trying to get players to understand, control what you can control. You can control your time during the day. You can control what you work on. And I think what I'm hoping for is, like we had talked about, they can work with you or I once a week, once a month, twice a week, but there's still 4 or 5 other days, 6 other days that you should be working on your own. Well, now you've got all of these coaches doing online or doing Zoom or doing FaceTime training. Now you've done it at home. So when we go back, you can't say, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
You can't say, well, when do I work on it? Because I've worked on it at home. I've worked on it at my own pace. So I'm hoping that the discipline and the organization, the time management skills for some of the younger players will get better.
And you're talking about ownership.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you're talking about these kids kind of owning, like no one's necessarily has their thumb on them, behind them, hey, whipping them with a stick. I mean, I coach my son's team too, right? Our club team, and I've given them a couple of different assignments for hands and stuff like that. And some of the kids will turn them in, and some of them won't. Like I'm not beating them down. I'm not making them run wind sprints or anything. Like it's kind of up to them,
right?
And that's what's pretty neat about this. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at, right? Is get around some good people that can, if you don't know what to do, they can help you with what to do, and you got to go and do it. You got to own it. And at the end of this, when this is all kind of said and done, we don't know how this is going to change. It's going to change.
Yeah.
I mean, there's college programs that are dropping their athletics, that are dropping their baseball programs. From usually it's not the bigger ones yet, but we don't know if that's going to happen with football. I mean, there's so many dynamics, right? But when that change is made and it's your time to step up, we'll kind of get back to this to some degree of normalcy. Even if it's for a younger kid, it's club tournaments and stuff like that. Like, what have you done? It's going to show, right? We just had like a little mini camp yesterday. A small group of guys, just a couple coaches, and you could tell which catchers had been doing something with throwing because their old bad habits come back, and you can spot them right away. And again, it's not that we're, probably what you and I do to some degree in terms of training, we're not writing a starting lineup but you start to see a little bit of, the difference in makeup, even in 2 15-year-olds. One of them takes it kind of full on. This is me. This is what I want to do. This is what I love to do. And others may want to play video games for 3 hours a day or 4 hours a day.
It's an interesting dynamic because prior to this, we would have conversations with players because, you always have those kids that maybe were cut from the freshman tryout and they didn't get to play that first year of high school, trying to explain to them there's really not a big difference between, I'm just using freshmen that make the program and the ones that don't, because you don't lose those hours. What the player that makes the team gets is someone telling him when to be here, what to practice, how long to practice.
Still 24-hour day.
Still 24-hour day. You're done. He's staying. You can still go to the weight room. You can still run. You can still find someone else to play catch with. You can still ask one of your buddies, hey, you want to hang out after and hit with me? But how are you going to bounce back.
That's
from
a great point.
And that's the difference. And even if you don't ultimately make that team the next year, how did you grow from that? I don't ever want a player to take your opinion or my opinion, because we get to a level of coaching and that's what we have to do. I have to make decisions based on what I see right now. Now, maybe, this player, if you give him 3 more months to work, he might pass 2 or 3 of those kids. But right now, I don't have that luxury to view it. So how are you going to take that adversity? And we try to focus on things that go beyond the baseball field, because you're not always going to get the job you apply for.
Right.
You're not always going to get the promotion. That's why I said I meant you. I didn't mean you. But, they have to bounce back from that. And there's always some truth, for the parents out there, there's always some truth in what the coaches tell you. It's not always they're out to get me. It's not always a conspiracy or what's the word that they always throw around?
The daddy coach. Or
it's not that.
Ball.
Maybe you do need to get faster. Maybe you do need to get stronger. Take some of that and say, okay, I'm going to go back. I'm going to rework my routine and
kinda
try to get better.
Back to humility, right? Kind of have that humility to recognize the spirit, even if a coach, kind of comes off as maybe even a little malicious, or right? It's like the messenger may not have been exactly what you wanted, but there's still some things that we can benefit from that.
Sure.
Always, there's things that we can benefit, and that's again, the perception kind of skews that.
Yeah.
For us sometimes.
Yeah. So now, fast forward, we're through the coaching part, and right now, you're running your business, Next Level Catching Academy. Why don't you tell me a little bit, or tell everyone a little bit about how that started and what you do and how they can find you, et cetera?
Well, it started way back in 2010. A couple guys that you know pretty well, Javi Ochoa and Mike Serena. They were both guys that had played for me in college. Awesome dudes, great energy, high enthusiasm. We had kind of a good vision and heart. We didn't know what it would turn into back then. We played around for a year and a half, 2 years, with doing some of these camps for catchers out in the kind of San Gabriel Valley, kind of Western Inland Empire area. 4 to 8 different catchers showing up here and there, and then over just a number of years, it's just grown, again, because of the quality of what we brought to what we were teaching, kind of running it like a college practice, was intriguing. It was new. Back at that time, there weren't many people that were doing it. Now there's, 30, different people doing it. But our model was pretty neat. And the way that we really kind of took an interest in the kids and their development is, I think, what's unique about what we do. Anybody can teach blocking, but how we did it, I think, is what's been different. And we've just kind of continue that model. We've tweaked it a little bit. We've worked on our efficiency, and that's gotten better. And so really through 2014 to 15 to even into 17, we've just kind of continued to grow. As I've continued to coach college, sometimes it's been difficult to kind of manage my teaching position, right? Manage my coaching position, and then kind of manage the catching academy. So I've really relied on the field on some guys that are really competent, have good energy, and ultimately care about the kids, right? They're not just there to just get a paycheck, you know. And so we continue to look for that. So we continue to kind of seek for those things. We want to be unique with what we're doing. Even some of the drills, we do beg, borrow, and steal some of the drills and some of the purposes. But I think we've got a couple guys that I think are pretty resourceful and inventive with tailoring certain things to produce a certain outcome and to push guys or challenge guys. Coming into 2020 now, I mean, we're like 10 years in, and things are going. We've, again, like I said, I think we took a little hit last year when I was coaching. I had such a big responsibility over at Biola that there wasn't a lot of me left to give in other places. I kind of chose to kind of give some of those extra hours to my family and my kids because of the long days and hours and sometimes travel. Yeah. But we're kind of back at it. We've recently just kind of created a program for guys to kind of do a little bit of journaling. Yes, giving them some kind of ways to get better, but really try to make it systematic. And I think that's going to be a pretty neat thing. Kind of, again, the times that we're in have given us time, kind of like even just with you doing this, right? Like 7 or 8 years ago, like it might have been an idea, but you've got the time to invest, to plan, to prepare, and to make it happen. And so we've had the same idea for maybe just a little under a month to give catchers a little bit more of a kind of between the ears type development with catching. We're on the field, we do a lot of skill stuff, and now we've got these monthly modules that we've come up with that we're building as we go for right now, that kind of helps catchers with kind of the finer points, and some of them are fundamental and basic just in terms of leadership and stuff like that, but some of them are maybe a little bit more advanced with how to call pitches and how to handle your pitching staff. I mean, for me as a catching developer, right, as a guy that runs a catching academy, but also has coached, I really have looked back and reflected back on who are some of the best catchers that we've had, and the guys that I've coached, or even guys that I've seen from other teams, and they're not always the most dynamic. They're not always the best throwers. In some cases, sometimes they're not even the best receivers. And we see like a lot of the metrics now, and baseball is giving us all these measurements on receiving, and which is huge. I mean, for me, it's always kind of been the most important skill, but really a skill that we can't kind of put our thumb on, identify, and it's difficult to teach guys to do, is how do you manage a game? How do you manage a pitching staff? You got one pitcher in one situation, that same pitcher might be in a different situation an inning later, with pressure, with no pressure, with a certain part of the lineup. Then you got a different pitcher coming out from the bullpen. And so how to handle those things are things that we want to be able to teach our guys, because really it's probably the most valuable thing that catchers can have. And even again, coaching at Biola last year, we had a redshirt freshman catcher, a couple of the guys that kind of had caught part-time, not a ton of experience. We had a converted catcher. He was converted the year before. Not a lot of innings, just in terms of playing Division II competitive baseball, right? Sure. And the times that they did well was when they kept the pace of play going, right? I mean, signs, calling pitches, calling time, taking your mound visits, you know what I'm saying? The times when we struggled were slow tempo, balls off the glove, 2-strike balls that you got to block, that are, and the momentum that really the leadership of the catching position and the performance of that position, how that changes the momentum throughout the game, it's pretty impacting. I mean, and that's why, again, for most recruiters, it's they want left-handed pitching, they want power pitchers, they want catchers, they want shortstops, they kind of go through the middle, right? But that defensive intangible for catchers, again, take the throwing aside. I mean, again, we didn't throw particularly well last year, but when we did a good job, like our catchers did a good job of controlling the running game, they would throw when they had to throw. It may not have been in the second inning with 2 outs, but it may have been in the 7th inning, with a go-ahead run perhaps. And so those are the things that we want to develop within the Catching Academy. We're just trying to come up with just new ways to help catchers, again, amidst this tragedy that we're kind of going through, catastrophe. And we're going to see kind of how that evolves. I think these monthly modules will evolve with our guys. Hopefully we'll get back on the field kind of with our full camps, but again, most high schools and colleges are closed, so we're pretty limited there. Yeah.
Actually, what you were talking about, and I was trying to go through my head just a quick count of how many catchers are managing throughout minor and Major League Baseball, because what you're talking about is essentially things that you get as a coach. As a coach, you can't be focused on one position. You have to focus on the entire game and the flow. And so finding those catchers, and even at the younger ages, it's hard to find players that don't tune out. If I'm talking to the catcher, my first baseman and third baseman are over there talking about, what are we going to eat after the game, or, how long are we going to be out here? So you need to find those players, especially in that catching position, that are paying attention to what you're telling everybody, so they know where everyone is supposed to be. And so that is essentially what a coach has to do. So finding a catcher that has that coach mentality is tough, especially at a younger age. How would I go about finding information about?
We've got a website. It's been up and running. We don't do a ton of upkeeping, but it's nextlevelcatchingacademy.com. We've got a homepage. We've got certain things that we'll post new things up there from time to time. We've got Instagram. It's Next Level CA. Our Twitter, same thing, at Next Level CA. Next level CA at Ymail is our email. Okay. But again, the probably easiest way is just nextlevelcatchingacademy.com, and then the other methods of contacting us are on there as well.
Okay, now, finally and most importantly,
the Dolphins?
Yeah, the Dolphins.
Yes.
If we get to a season, and I would like to say we did get a win already, because when they were talking about starting, it was the Dolphins that came out with a plan to get people in the stadium and out of the stadium. So, thinking about making money, thinking about getting people to the stadium, at least we're first in that. So everything that they've done, you watched whatever it was at the draft, and for me that was my highlight, because I didn't even know if we were actually going to play a season, or you had sent me the comment about what we had, and I said, hey, we're on our way to 8-8. But when you look at what they've done, and regardless of whether they play or not, what are you feeling?
I mean, I keep tabs on what's happening, right, with them a little bit. I don't have a high degree of knowledge in terms of like what they need. Obviously, I mean, we got Tua.
Yeah.
There were talks of Herbert and stuff like that, but I think Tua, again, with his makeup, again, we're talking kind of catching intangibles makeup. Like, everything that you read and hear about him is that his makeup's through the roof. The game's going to speed up, but he'll be able to adapt to that because he's got humility, he's got work ethic, he's got integrity, and all those things that are going to help him. Hopefully he just stays healthy, right, for the next 13 years.
Right.
Let's see what else they added. They added Jordan Howard, I think, in free agency, right?
Yeah.
I think he'll be a little bit of a help, but I would have liked to see them maybe take a running back in that second pick, or maybe even the safety.
Yeah.
Right. But again, I'm not super well versed with every single detail of.
Well, when you're as involved in baseball, it's hard to follow that too. But more from a fanboy perspective, I'm watching everything, and it's nice to see that money that they were cutting being spent on bringing in guys in, and not to just save, or the fact that they were getting things that you see would help them set up for Tua, linemen, speed, defensive backs, so we're not giving up 500 yards a game in the air, and all those different things. So
the best part that happened is that we don't have to face Tom Brady twice a year. That's the best part.
Yeah, well, now I'm worried. I start going through the schedule and thinking, okay, well, who's the next one? Because you went from Jim Kelly to Tom Brady, and it feels like it's been 30 years of a Hall of Fame quarterback. And it's tough when you see all of the Super Bowl participants from the AFC coming out of your division and guys that you're looking up at. If it wasn't Buffalo, then it was New England. You're like, all right, we got to face
them. It's kind of open right now, right?
Yeah, now it's like everybody.
I mean, you got Josh Allen, who's
right.
He's talented. Yeah. He's pretty good. He's developing. You got Darnold, but they're both young.
Yeah, and the parts around them. How good are they going to be without all of those pieces? And are their organizations going to do that? And then you look in the AFC. Right now it kind of looks like everything's going to go through Kansas City for a while. And who knows? But like I said, at least it's leveled out. Maybe even the Ravens. So
totally in the AFC.
I kind of like to think Tua's in that mold with Jackson and Mahomes, kind of a mobile, smaller guy that can move around and make things happen. And hopefully you get the right combination of people in the Dolphins office that don't want to be third. We'll go and do what we need to do to get past those two guys. And
I think what I like is that they finished the season off pretty well last year, and I think that, like, you talk about the adversity in terms of how they start and how it's pretty easy. We've talked kind of player development. We've talked even team dynamics, right? It's easy to throw in the towel when you're whatever they were, 3-7 or 2-7, 2-6 or whatever. But they kind of turn it on. They kind of found a way within themselves, whatever it was that happened, whatever it was that the coach, whether it's leadership from the top or whether it's the players, like, it all goes together.
Sure.
And I think that's what's fun and that's what's promising for them, because they got a taste, they got a little look of, hey, we can compete in this league.
Yeah.
We don't have necessarily these big names. We can compete in this league. Now we just add a couple pieces. We continue to grow that culture. Yeah. And we'll see what happens, right? I mean, ultimately, championship teams have championship cultures. They have high standards. They have accountability. They find ways to re-energize themselves when they need it, And at the end of the day, you walk off the field and say, hey, man, we prepared the way we needed to prepare. We had a great time doing it. The scoreboard says what it says, right? Let's go back and do it again next week, And so I think that's what's pretty uplifting for me. Again, we've been fans forever, for decades.
Yeah.
And it's been up and down. Lately, it's been mostly down.
Yeah.
But hopefully we're turning around.
Well, I can tell you one of the things you just mentioned right now. Early on when there was those first 2 boat races, there was guys that were already throwing in the towel.
Yeah.
They wanted out, and good riddance to them. Everybody kind of knew going in what you were going to get. But if you don't want to be a part of that, you don't want to try to be a person that changes the direction, then go. And hopefully what they got in return for those guys will help, and hopefully they'll get enough hungry guys that don't want to give up those positions. Because I did like the fact that they were going through free agents left and right last year. They were bringing in anybody that ever put on pads. Hey, come on, give it a try.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't fault them for that, because there's a lot of guys out there that can play, even though they didn't come from those big schools and those big, back pushes that you get in the draft. So hopefully, they get things going and we can at least have football to look to. But I mean, hey, I can tell you from person, my YouTube has been burning up because I've been watching all the Dan Marino 84 games, and I just been locked in on 82, 83. So I didn't look at anything past about 90. I just watching back when, when I was proud to wear my hat. But otherwise, I mean, I think we've had some good convo, and as always, man, you're welcome back. Hopefully we can keep some time going. That's one of the unique things right now is, if it were a regular time, you wouldn't have Friday off.
Yeah.
So I'm fortunate to get you and other coaches and other baseball people in, because we've got the time to do this. Yeah. And I mean, regardless of whether it's on film, when's the last time we sat and just chatted?
It's been a while.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. I think what people that are watching, they have to recognize kind of your heart for this and your heart to bring people in, just to learn, just to get kind of different perspectives, so that they can hear the different perspectives. Because by no means am I, some sage in coaching or baseball, or even just kind of my evolution for even learning catching and talking catching or hitting, it adjusts, right? And so what you're doing here is you're bringing, different voices, different minds, obviously people that are credible, people that and you kind of believe in what they're doing, for the goal of helping your viewers and giving them some information, even if it's just something to think about, right? Something to write down, because there may be, we've been here for maybe a little over an hour, and there may be, 4 sentences that they pulled out that they can take home with them, whether it's intangibles, discipline, parents, whatever it is, recruiting. And so I appreciate what you're doing with this, Ernie. This is pretty neat. Obviously, you're a guy to have fun with. It's easy. It's easy to have fun with you, man. So
I appreciate that.
Good stuff, man.
Well, and I think one of the things is, you would be the first to back me up on this. If someone were to see this and to reach out to you and just have a question, you wouldn't need anything other than the fact that they had a question for you to answer it happily. Yeah. And I think that's the thing that I like most about this, is that most of my friends and our friends, and they're baseball guys and understand that we were in that position one time too. And I want coaches like you and other coaches to come in and not just be faces behind a website. Right. I'm approachable. Right. You can talk to me. I'm more than happy to help you, even if it's just a little point in the right direction on your journey. If something that I can spend 5 minutes explaining to you is going to help you go 4 more miles on your trip, great. Because at some point we were all trying to grab that last rung on the ladder.
Think of again, you alluded to this, but like if you had the information that other people have what am I trying to say here? If you would have some of the resources, some of the mentors, that are around now, that you've been yourself, right? Like that would have impacted your journey.
Yeah.
That would have impacted it in a number of different ways, and for myself as well. And that's ultimately what drives me.
Sure. Yeah, just to be part of that chain going forward.
Helping people, man. Yeah. That's what we want to do.
Well, again, thanks for spending part of your Friday with me again. Good to see you. Yeah, I think you're okay. This was filmed way before COVID. But again, I want to thank Justin for coming in. Catch him at Next Level Catching Academy on Instagram. You can also look it up online. Again, thank you to Chihuahua Cerveza, our proud sponsor, and 100% Media. So until next time, we'll see you.